Welcome, everybody, to the Comics Aficionados, the Saturday panel with all of your comic geek culture needs and wants all in one place. Today, we've got a wonderful panel for you. We're going to be talking about the creators who defined eras. And I know there are some pictures on the thumbnail, and maybe some people are outraged or you got it all wrong. Those are just friendly suggestions or just ideas of the creators who could fit in those ages. We will be talking about 5 different ages. I know there's not a consensus on this either, but we needed 5 to fill up the segments correctly. So we're going to go with it. And here with me to talk about that is a gaggle of nerds who love talking about comic book history. And first up is the oldest nerd, the man who was there since the golden age, Eric Breen. How you doing?
Good morning, kids.
Hi, Dad.
Can we speed this along? I've got pudding at 11:30.
Absolutely. Also with us is the X-Men historian, the Marvel historian, Doc. How you doing?
I'm apparently coughing. Yes. No, I'm great, guys. I'm great. I'm really looking forward to this subject. I love talking this stuff.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a fun one. Obviously, the man that's going to bring the whole panel down, the curmudgeon of critical. Pele, what's up?
It's Saturday morning. It's raining. Whatever.
Exactly. And the man that's going to bring the heat, he's going to shoot on the entire industry and the panel at the same time. Heel Yule in the house.
Yeah, I can do that if you want. I'd be happy to talk about comics, so.
Absolutely. And then last but not least, Perch, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Yeah, I'm excited to be here. See, there's the energy.
Was that Brains?
No,
Brain, was that?
No, that was my emails for eBay auctions I won.
Oh, there you go. Well, I guess should we just get into it? Get the party started. We got a lot of stuff to hit here. So Absolutely. First up, we're going to talk about the Golden Age. Comics, obviously, 1938, 1956, beginning with the introduction to Superman. And in that time, we had the debut of Superman. Timely Comics was formed. Batman and Wonder Woman created. Captain America debuted. Obviously, this is also during the time of the Second World War. Certainly heavily influential on the comic book industry. All right, Pele, we're going to throw it to you. What are your thoughts on the Golden Age and the creators who define that era?
Oh man, it's so amazing. It really is. It's one of those things. That era really didn't appeal to me until I really got into comics history and really started to enjoy those older stories, because they're kind of an acquired taste. You know, there's a lot of retro vibe from them, and you know, they don't have the modern energy, but they have a charm, I guess you could say, all their own. And it's just so much historical significance. I mean, you can, there's a lot of, I hate that word, problematic stuff that went on during that time. But all in all, you know, it's just an amazing period of time for comics. And I love collecting the old Timeleys and the old Fawcett's, and you know, and the old DCs, of course. But yeah, it's right,
so who are the amazing creators, man?
Wonderful.
Who are the big time creators? The men
Bob Kane.
Basically created the industry.
Bob Kane, of course, creator of Batman. Just, you know, you had Simon and
it's Simon Schuster.
Yeah.
Siegel and Schuster.
Siegel and Schuster. What am I thinking of? Simon and Schuster. Siegel and Schuster. Yeah. I don't know what I was thinking of. But yeah, Joel Siegel. But anyway, yeah, I'm still half asleep. But anyway, yeah, it's just I think that all in all, we really don't understand how much of a departure that was from other periodicals at the time. I mean, you have to look at comics before then. You know, you had pulps at the time. You know, the early pulps, which I've collected some of those too, but it was just such a radical departure at that time. Action Comics #1 comes out and just blows the lid off of the monthly magazine sales. And then not long after that, Detective Comics, which had been, you know, a pretty decent seller at the time, Batman was introduced. And then it kicked off really hard after, going into World War II as a kind of propaganda tool, as well as a way to entertain kids, who were really getting into the war effort. And Captain America blew up. Captain Marvel, who arguably was, well, not even arguably, he was more popular than Superman for like a decade. He was outselling Superman like 4 and 5 to 1. So, it was just an amazing time. Those creators, they were trendsetters. They were pioneers who, without them, we wouldn't have anything we have today as far as comics, and just the vision that they had to create the superhero genre it's mind blowing.
All right. Does anybody else have any other golden age creators that they want to talk to, and maybe some of the influences that they brought to the industry?
I do.
Yeah, go ahead.
Go.
Joe Simon.
Oh yeah. Just
with his primarily for Captain America. He's really just kind of defined, patriotic, he kind of, as much as Superman created the superhero genre, Joe Simon kind of turning it into a quintessentially American by attaching it to Captain America and as borderline propaganda, but like kind of just overall pro-American. I mean, if you're going to call it propaganda, it's just pro-American propaganda. I see a lot of people talking Kirby. I hold Kirby, as important as Kirby is to the Golden Age, I still think he's a much, much bigger impact than the Silver.
Yeah.
But we'll get to that when we get to Silver.
Because then you have to look at Stan Lee too. What impact did he have in the Gold? It was huge, but it wasn't nearly the impact of the Silver.
Yeah, Stan was kind of and actually even Martin Goodman.
Mm-hmm.
Just kind of making keep making comics into this kind of very American art form that is that chased so many different trends in that era. Because as a publisher, he was trying to just find trends to keep books on shelves in your corner newsstand. So I don't know if we'd really consider publishers on the creative side, but I think he's also incredibly important to them.
Yeah. I don't think it can really be understated, how pivotal it was, for entertainment at the time, because that was the main mode of entertainment, that and the radio, was magazines, comic books and the radio. So, those were the two forms of media that really, that mattered at the time. I mean, they sold comics. One particular title sold more issues than all of comics together now.
Yeah, they were like disposable, things, and they were,
they were
recycling going on and stuff like that, right? And they were in the millions, the print runs, right?
Yeah, the paper drive, for the war, was huge. That's what decimated the golden age comic population. But it was necessary. We were fighting a war. So, Action Comics number 8, had a circulation of 9.4 million. I mean, but everybody bought it. All the kids bought it. It was just like, it's insane. It's absolutely insane what the circulations were. And we only have 48 copies left.
That's awesome. One of the first sort of crossovers that happened was in the Golden Age, and that was with Namor and the Human Torch.
Yeah, and Marvel Mystery Comics number 1.
So that'd be like Bill Everett, and I always forget Carl Burgos. Yeah, creating those characters. So that was pretty significant because, if I'm not mistaken, that was like some of the highest selling comics at the time.
Yeah,
was the flooding of New York and all that stuff, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh, then you had EC Comics with horror titles. I mean, that defined the genre. And of course, it also brought hell. It brought hell to the comics industry.
I'll be touching on that.
Yeah, I don't leave that to Breen, but oh my God, comics really got. I mean, there was stuff published in comics that we don't even have today. I mean, it was so gory. It was so the horror comics were so intense and adult. But I'll hand it to Breen. Go ahead, Breen.
Yeah, I was going to say, if no one else is going to mention him, William Gaines. Because I said when EC started, it was educational comics and run by his father, and then after an ill-fated boating trip, it was turned over to his son, who, if I remember correctly, really wasn't that interested in doing it. But when he decided to take it and run with it, he assembled a tremendous group of creators, and they turned horror into a genre that was more than just gore. I mean, they were. They told stories. They had messages. There's usually an ironic twist at the end, so they went more for storytelling than just the gore. And it was the same with the science fiction, the war comics they did, and then in the mid 50s when I always forget the guy's name. The Seduction of the Innocent.
Yeah. Oh,
that was his name.
Wortham.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And I can remember Estes Kefauver, but I couldn't remember Wortham. And they had the trial, and this is why I say that EC, that Gaines was helped define the end of the golden age and the beginning of the Silver Age, is at the trial when a certain exhibit was brought into the trial. And I know Pele probably has 5 copies of these and uses them for bookmarks, but this particular issue. And they asked me, said, well, Mr. Gaines, do you feel this cover is in good taste? And he said, well, yes, I do. And they said, please explain. He goes, well, we didn't show the blood. Well, that was pretty much the end of the trial and the creation of the Comics Code Authority. Yeah. And without that, I don't know if DC would have ever bothered to try to revive the superheroes with the Flash. So you could make a case that they kind of helped define the beginning of the Silver Age, because we might not have gotten that if horror comics had been able to continue unabated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't think we would have.
Yep.
It took those war comics and horror comics and stuff to trigger Wortham, which triggered the Silver Age.
Yeah, but we're not quite ready to get to the Silver Age.
Yeah.
Hurch, you haven't really gone in here. We've heard in the chats Will Eisner's name come up quite a few times. Obviously, one of the most influential artists as far as sequential storytelling, very influential. Do you consider him really a golden age creator?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of these people, and I think some other people in the chat have been mentioned. We talked about Kirby as well as coming in. There's people who got their start here. But I mean, the name that's also come up in the chat, and it's been on screen a bunch, is Bill Finger, I think, who really had a pretty major influence on that timeline. Was a relatively quiet guy, and of course, we're learning a lot more about him now. But I think he's a name that not only had a big influence, but also is going to be heard more and more, kind of as more time goes by and more stories come out. But the other one for me, I mean, I think Lou Fine, who did Black Condor, is always one, and many other things. Because as an artist, really, I think did things with a page that a lot of others weren't doing, and was putting in a lot of detail. And I think I look at, I mean, this could be a weird stretch in a way, but I look at people like John Byrne, who had come much, much later and really fill the panel with a lot of detail, a lot of complexity, and try and make every page kind of piece of art. And I think Lou Fine really, for the time period, was doing a lot in that era. And I think there's so many other. We're seeing a lot of names come up. I think a lot of good people. Like's been said, I think the Golden Age did a lot to kind of set the tone for what comics would be, and nothing moves quickly. So the actions that were happening then had an impact for decades that followed. It built enough of a foundation, enough of a platform, enough bedrock that comics could survive, and with some tough times too. I mean, a lot of people forget that, like in the 50s and some of the things we're mentioning in the 60s, it was there was a lot of changes to entertainment. Comics stayed strong, and I think it was the foundation that was really applied in the Golden Age that helped that happen. So I mean, arguably, I think of all the ages, the Golden Age did the most to set up comics for what it could be, and maybe as we're going to get to it with other ages, there was erosion in almost every of the other age to some extent. The golden age was really about a lot of growth. So we'll get
like
there.
you said, it was very much about creation. It's the genesis of comics. Obviously, we talked about a lot of the big superheroes. Not all the big Marvel superheroes really have come out, but the Trinity had Bree. But also at the same time, the foundation was laid for the team book, which is obviously a cornerstone of comic books with the Justice Society of America.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I guess so many of the ideas that are out today started here, and we've been mining those for years. And so a lot of great, and it's funny because more and more people, I think, are missing the golden age, and the big publishers and more Marvel and DC are almost kind of telling people, it really doesn't matter. Continuity doesn't stretch back. Now, obviously, they didn't play in that space, but it's. I see this. I don't know. I'm not making my point well. I see this deprioritization in many ways as they're talking to comic readers about this age. And, I mean, put a different way, I think there's tons of content here to reprint and leverage and do things. So if you're a new comic reader, this can be a great place to start, a really easy way to step in. Go ahead, Bailey.
Oh, no. I was just gonna say that as far as I know that the prices are kind of daunting. One of the issues here with getting those issues. I mean, OG stuff it's daunting, but there's some fantastic reprints. The EC reprints are amazing. They're trade paperbacks. We were talking about that actually in one of the discussion rooms that I'm in recently about the EC trade paperbacks. They're awesome. They really are. They're so well put together, and you get a historical perspective. And it's really, really great stuff. You had Jack Davis, Wally Wood. My personal favorite of there is Severin. He was just, man, you talk about somebody that was decades ahead of his time as far as pushing the art form. Severin was just mind blowing in his detail and his eye for foreshadowing, and it's amazing stuff.
No, question. Oh, go ahead. No, go ahead.
One last name I'll throw in here as well that's a favorite of mine is Bernard Bailey. If people aren't familiar with him, did work. And I think maybe Pele knows this. The answer is better than me or somebody else. I believe started his own publisher, or became a publisher at some point. So it started his own imprint. But Bailey, I think, did just his work was the use of shadow and the use of art was just really incredible. So you haven't heard that name, go check that stuff out too. He's an incredible talent.
Yeah, his impact on artists going into the Silver Age is just it can't be ignored.
I'd say one of the biggest in terms of the amount of artists that aped his style. I think you don't hear that name a lot, but so many people used his influence.
Carmine Infantino too.
Yeah.
So we do have a question from the viewers, and it says, does anyone on the panel own a Golden Age comic they really prize? Breen, I know you've had some Golden Age comics in your lifetime. Is there one that stands out above the rest that you actually had your little hands on?
Yeah, I just had my little hands on them 5 minutes ago.
Oh, that's the one.
I didn't have many Golden Age. I like maybe a Batman, a detective here and there, but when I sold, I kept that crime suspense stories. Just because the cover's just so iconic.
Yeah.
All right, do you have a Golden Age comic that's your number one?
Yeah, probably. Well, no, personally, no, I do not. Okay. I don't collect Golden Age.
All right,
not yet.
Moving on. Doc, how about you? You got any Golden Age?
Actually, I have 0 Golden Age. I have about 15 books in my want list for Golden Age, but they're like, shit I'm never gonna own.
$30,000.
Yeah. The shit I'm never gonna own category. But no, I mean, like if I ever stumble across it, yes, I'll absolutely just yoink.
I have a Superman #7. It's all duct taped on the spine. I guess I do have a Golden Age comic actually.
There you go.
Yeah. How about you, Perch? Is there one Golden Age comic that you own that you prize?
Well, it's why I went to Bernard Bailey. I've got some of the more fun comics that he did, and I've got some action comics in the earlier run. Certainly not the single digit ones, but I've got a few. I don't know. I view that era more about artists. So I have some that I have the debut of the Spectre, so I think that's one of the more fun comics I can't remember, and that one's worth some money, but I love that. I love that. So, and by the way, so I just had to answer my own question. So I looked up quickly. Bailey, who I mentioned, formed a publishing company, Bailey Publications. But the more interesting part is that in his studio, the people he took under his wing included Gil Kane, Carmen Infantino, Frank Frazetta. So you think about that kind of influence. It just I'd forgotten. That it blows my mind.
All right. Well, last but not least, I've left you out hanging there, Pele. Is there one Golden Age comic you own that you prize among greater than all the rest, or that you've owned in your lifetime?
I've probably up till about probably up till about 3 months ago, I would have said that my Detective 1, and I've got a Detective 27 that I've had both for a very, very long time, decades. Back before they were $1 million books. Detective 1's 5.5. The 27 is a 7.0, slight restoration.
Okay.
Okay.
But
I was going to say a 7.0.
But if I pulled the restoration off, it'd probably get about a 6. It's got light color touch. I haven't done it because it's just so pretty. I just don't bother. But I did bite the bullet, and I had been working on a trade for about 2 years to get a bunch of Superman's actions, early actions, and we worked out a big trade and deal. And I did finally get my hands on an Action 1, so I'm very, very happy with that.
Bravo.
Jesus.
And
that was $1 million book before they even said it.
It was. I got it recently back from grading. It graded out pretty well.
Now, is this from the collection in Colorado?
No. This was a private. No. This is a private.
Okay, that's the one that's like the 9.6.
Mile High. No.
Collection.
This one graded out a 6.0, unrestored.
Wow, that's quite amazing.
And I was very, very excited about that. It had been a 5.5. It was a 5.5. I cleaned it, pressed it, did a little sympathetic cleaning, very, very lightly, and was able to massage another half point out of it. But still, that Detective #1 though, it's so rare, and I just loved it. That was the comic that really got me when I was a kid. Fu Manchu cover, and for some reason, it was just that comic meant so much to me. Wow, this is the first comic book. Is what my mind at the time was like. This is the first comic book, and I wanted it so bad, desperately. And I think that probably still has a higher place for me, and personally, than any other comic that I have, is that Detective 1.
Wow. On that note, I don't think we can talk about Golden Age comics too much longer. That's amazing. I knew you had some.
I did have one
comics.
question. I did have one question. What everybody thinks of it is: does Bob Kane's contribution to the general chaos of creator credit that is continued to this day, does that really rise to it? Does that make him that important?
No, he is important. I'm going to tell you why, because I've kind of been itching to do this. There's a lot of creators in the 60s even, but especially in the Golden Age and whatever came before, a lot of people didn't get credit for the work that they were doing.
Yeah.
And that's because of guys like Bob Kane. Bob Kane and Marston were like guys that actually owned their creations, Siegel and Schuster, until they sold it. And, these are the people that and Bob Kane was like on the highest level of guys that knew how to sell stuff and keep, retain. And he also was the model of how to be a jerk, but also a model of how to have control over what you do and, not get screwed like Kirby ultimately does, and so many other people under Kirby.
Yeah.
So I think it is important. I don't know if we have to give him all the credit because he supposedly stole from like so much stuff beforehand. Also, sorry.
Somebody
No,
was comment. Oh, go ahead.
No, I just would say Kane. It doesn't have to be subtractive. I think Kane definitely had an impact on the industry. I think now, as we know, Bill Finger and many others. I think he took credit for a lot of things maybe he shouldn't have, but that doesn't mean he's irrelevant. It just means that there's more people that need to share that pie in terms of the credit than we originally knew. But he was like a Stan Lee before there was a Stan Lee in a lot of cases.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And that's why I was asking, like, does that like kind of the drama that isn't really necessarily in the comics, but is about the comic book industry?
Yeah.
That kind of is, it defines the comic book industry. There's just as much drama off the page and behind the scenes and I think Bob Kane was kind of the forefather of that.
Well, he had to. I mean, he really did. He poured so much of his heart and soul into what he was doing, and he was one of the founder of that whole genre, along with Schuster and Simon. But it's
well, look how that played out between the two parties. Simon, or Siegel and Schuster.
Why do I keep saying Simon? Jesus Christ!
Because it's a publisher.
I know. I keep doing that. I do that
because I just called them yesterday. That's why.
Because I was just. Oh, yeah, I did have a deal with them not a while back for trade paperbacks, but anyway, you can't separate the creators from the age, and that's one of the main reasons why is because they these were the first people who really got screwed by the man,
Mm-hmm.
and if they hadn't fought for what their rights on that, where would we be today? So.
Publishing is hardcore, especially in those in the early days like that. If you read some of the Making Marvel Comics or whatever that book was called, they go into all the publishing and in the 40s and stuff like that, and it's cutthroat. I mean,
oh yeah, like $1 a page. Not even $1 a page.
There's there's mob enforcers involved. Stuff like that.
I just wanted to double check that we did mention Will Eisner, right?
We did.
Oh, yeah. Okay, good.
Again, another guy that actually owned his own material and took it from what like the 40s to the late 60s or something like that. Mm-hmm. Pretty impressive. A couple other names that are notable. I'm sorry, Wes, if you wanted to move on. Jack Cole, who did Plastic Man, and Alex Toth, who's probably like my favorite. He's probably more well known for the 60s and his animation stuff. But he did he did a Green Lantern, whatever his name is.
Yeah, he's like Bernie Wrightson 1.0. Was Toth. I mean, I love Toth's artwork. He's just some of his mummy work, some of the work on the Wolfman is just that's quintessential. It's beautiful, beautiful work.
Mm-hmm.
All right, guys, we do have to move on. Obviously, we could probably do a 2-hour segment on all these eras, but I'm trying to fit into this one. And it's time to talk about the Silver Age, 1956 to 1970. In this time frame, the Justice League, Spider-Man, Thor, Hulk, Avengers, X-Men, and Iron Man all debut. Atlas Comics becomes Marvel, and the Comics Code Authority is formed. Breen, I'm sending this one to you. Obviously, the big names hanging out there are Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. What are some of the other names about the Silver Age creators that really stand out as being very influential to comic books?
Okay, I'm going to go off the board here and say somebody that inadvertently became very important to define the Silver Age was Joe Maneely. And I say that because if he hadn't stopped for a couple drinks and had better eyesight and doesn't step out in front of a train, Stan and Jack may never have gotten together again to form Marvel Comics. And because Joe was Stan's Jack at the time, and if he had lived, Kirby may have ended up staying at DC. He may have gone somewhere else. He might have gone to Dell or Gold Key or somewhere, and we may not have gotten Joan may never tell Stan to write that one story. They said, and you might not have had Jack to help him put it together. And there's no telling where the comic book industry would have gone had Joe Maneely lived.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
true.
There's a lot of, it strikes me in the Silver Age, there's a lot of stories like that of just kind of, circumstantial meetings and things that, accidents. A lot of the Steve Ditko has a lot of stories around that as well. Neil Adams. I mean, you had a lot of like people in the right place, the wrong, right time, or vice versa, that just seemed to it seemed like the Silver Age was based on a lot of luck and a lot of cases.
Well, it was.
It was.
It was a lot of just chaos, and chaos coming to put together into something. People just making the best out of pure chaos.
Yeah, look at the first titles that were just on the cusp of the Silver Age right then. They were not what we consider today to be superhero titles at all. It was like you had Amazing Fantasy 15. There was Amazing Adult Fantasy 1 through 14 before that. It's kind of like almost like a one-off thing. Like, oh, let's try the Spider-Man guy. And like you had Showcase number 4. And these were, but they rekindled that lightning in a bottle, and they were not expecting it. It hit them out of left field.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of that. There's a lot of cases of them just going, F it, try it. Because the whole industry was in flux. I mean, everything that was at the end of the Golden Age with Wortham, Wortham kind of killing the Golden Age, horror comics, war comics, supernatural comics, anything like that kind of went out the window. So now you had to, you were literally just like, okay, a lot of even crime comics. So at this point, you're an industry that's about to fall apart because all of the content you were using to support yourself over the last few decades has essentially been banned. Now you got to come up with something new.
What can we make that's exciting? What can we make that's exciting that doesn't get us, wrecked in court?
Yes, exactly. And going with something like superheroes, again, even though, you're kind of going back to your roots a little bit, was huge for them. I mean, because they had to go with something that they knew sold before. Mm-hmm. And at this point now it's just a question of throw anything at the wall and see what sticks.
Yeah.
I kind of love it.
What do you say as far as people? Showcase number 4, I think, is when they say really it kind of kicked off the Silver Age.
Agreed.
But first appearance of the Flash. I would argue it's Amazing Fantasy 15 because even though the Flash launched it, people, it did not sell. I'm sorry. People say, "Oh, the Flash is." It was important historically. It's very, very important. It did not really sell well. It sold better than the first previous issues, but it was not. It didn't set the world on fire.
But if we take a look at what comics are these days. It was the relaunches, characters changing, stripes, whatever. This started with the Flash, and then Hal Jordan, and everything in Marvel was new. This was different, but it was the same. And we see comics trying to be different, but the same. And it's like. That was a real significant situation that occurred because these were like the same idea of the characters, but different, people. Now it's just, I don't know, it's a little lamer maybe because you kind of like expect it. It's just a costume change. This was like really significant. And I think that's why the Flash or Showcase or whatever gets the play it does as being the reason why. But Marvel, as far as exciting people, I mean, DC still has the stigma of being like your grandfather's comic book.
Well, to a point, yeah, it does. But I challenge people to go back. What's interesting? I challenge people to go back those earliest DC Silver Age books. Read those. Read the Amazing Fantasy number 15. Read the reprints of first early issues of Amazing Spider-Man, Fantastic Four, X-Men, and read the DC titles and find out which ones are more that have actually better storytelling.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not trying to go DC versus Marvel.
Yeah,
in this fight.
Yeah, one is really driven by the artwork and the kind of vision, and the other one was driven by, I think, a better fundamentals. But it's still they both vital. They both really complemented each other.
I mean, Marvel had and I think this was Stan Lee's, I don't know, for lack of a better word, he had a better sense of when something was going to be hot, I think, and knew to lean into it. I mean, he was a showman, and I think that Marvel benefited. They had a better way of tapping into the momentum that they were getting than DC. They took better advantage of that moment, and I think it's. I agree with what Paley said. I know that. I would peg the Silver Age really at Amazing Fantasy 15 as that. I know that's not how the historians name it, but that was where it got put on the map. I think that's a good point. But there was a lot of good creators in there. I mean, just so many. Somebody in the chat mentioned Gardner Fox. I think John Broome. You had Roy Thomas. You had one of my favorite artists of all time, Barry Windsor Smith, getting a start in that era. Neil Adams, Jim Steranko. You could just go on and on.
Damn it, you stole my thunder on Steranko.
But you had just incredible artists and writers, and I think probably in many ways my favorite era. A lot of cases, there's just so many really entertaining stories, and the other part was that the storytelling got really diverse in the sense that you had serious stories, you had more comedic stories, you had a legitimate claim of some very different types of storytelling. And outside of, where Marvel dominates a lot of the attention, you had a lot of really cool indies come up and some good comics in that period as well. I mean, it was, I don't know, there's just a lot in this era to dig your teeth into. It was a great period for comics.
Okay.
All right, Doc. Talk about Jim Steranko, man. You said
go for it. Go for it. I was waiting for you.
I mean,
early, Doc.
Okay, well, I was just waiting to see if anybody had any follow-ups for you, brother. No, I you know what? Steranko is still probably my favorite, even though he was a little bit later into the Silver Age. There was a lot of guys doing interesting stuff over DC. He followed up Neil Adams. Like he kind of was mentored a little bit. Steranko was kind of mentored a little bit by Neil Adams, but no, Steranko's he brought showmanship to the artistic side as well as because a lot of you had your Bob Kanes, you had your Stan Lees, but most of those guys that were more showmen, kind of carnival barkers, they were on the writing side, and Steranko bringing that same kind of flash and flair to the artistic side, like personality wise, to try to sell comics is hugely important. That plus the fact that all of the storytelling kind of tools that he literally just invented himself, because storytelling was pretty straightforward. He started adding a lot of different things with how to make the eye follow stuff on the page. He took a lot of the innovations that guys like Kirby, guys that like Neil Adams had already had done, and he took them. He was like the Rob Liefeld back then, with taking all these cool little narrative tricks and exaggerating the crap out of them and turning them up to 11.
There's kind of a meme at this point, but I think it's important to point out he was the artist that really took advantage of negative space, and he made it. I mean, there's some pages. Some of the Nick Fury Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. just jaw-dropping work. I mean, you read it and you're just like, wow. Anybody who hasn't picked up that series, go get the trade on those. Read them digitally. I mean, this just stunning work. Nobody did a splash page like Steranko, and nobody did a single page spread like he did. It's just incredible, absolutely incredible.
Mind if I ask Pele a question real quick? Do you get a sense that comic book fans weren't ready for that kind of art at the time? Because I say that because, Green Lantern and Green Arrow and X-Men were both canceled while Neil Adams was drawing it.
Right.
Nick Fury didn't sell particularly well. And you go back a few years before that, DC put their best artists on their war, science fiction and romance books because comic book fans just wanted those 6-panel straight aheads. And do you feel like I said that, that maybe it took a few years after that for fans to catch up to what these guys were doing?
Yeah, I've talked to Steranko a couple times at shows, and one of the conversations we had was I was like, you're so far ahead of your time. I mean, you're Nick Fury, Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. People weren't ready for that, and he's like, yeah, man, that's right. It's absolutely true. He goes, Steranko's not shy. He's not a, I wouldn't say that he's.
He is definitely not a wallflower by any stretch.
No, he's not a wallflower, and he will toot his own horn. But the arrogance is well earned, and I wouldn't even call it arrogance. It's just self-confidence. But he's like, they didn't get it yet. It wasn't for them. It was for the generation after, and he's right. And if without him, we wouldn't have had the explosion that we had. Going into even stuff like, gosh, how much did he influence Todd McFarlane? I mean, and artists that came after. So he really did. He set the tone for the generations after that. But he wasn't. He was not as respected in his own time.
Yeah, and you know what, the Dorijo Duke's comment here is exactly it. The guys like Neil Adams and Steranko were, their hardcore fans were buying this stuff out before it even hit the stands.
Yeah,
but everybody else, like, they were so innovative that casual fans, it took them a little while to learn how to read, like, because they weren't sure how to read it. Like, it was so different from the way that they lay out a page and everything.
So innovative.
Yes.
But
there's a comment in the chat that I think was really smart. That during this period, it wasn't just Steranko; it was a lot of people. There were some, while there's some great artists and great pencilers, there's some horrible inkers, and there was some ruining of a lot of artwork that was out there. And there was, I think you did have a more random output in some cases of a lot of artists, because you had art that was just radically changed from the penciling to the end product. And I'm trying to think, and maybe somebody else can speak to it further, but in the Silver Age, I think that was almost more prevalent than any of these other eras, where you had just, the inker could radically change the page, and in many cases did. And you would see people's styles change quite a bit as a result. Does anybody else think that's accurate?
Well, they had to get that done. And it was often inking teams or other artists that were like filling in. Guys like Neil Adams didn't get a monthly out very often,
Mm-hmm.
There had or Crusty Bunkers in the 70s was a big deal, right? Which was like a bunch of different illustrators in a pod, I guess. And Joe Sinnott, he butchered a lot of Kirby art. If you look at Jack Kirby collectors, you can see the difference between what anybody could ink Jack Kirby. He put so much effort in almost everything. It would not have been difficult to just put some black in there. But Joe Sinnott's like, I gotta get 20 of these done by tomorrow,
Yep.
Or his people were doing it, or whoever they were,
A lot of them were art students that from the local college who were getting, just no money. They were interns.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought it was funny. I was reading a story about that. He was telling, he's like, I'd pick up these art students and just drive them down there in the bus. And, and that's what we do for an afternoon. or a weekend.
Mhm.
And you know, and they say, is this good? Yeah, that's great. That's great. You know?
The one that I would definitely, we haven't really talked about, was John Romita Sr.
Absolutely.
I mean, first of all, because he also produced John Romita Jr., who is, as much as people might complain about him, he's still one of the greats of all time. And, the way that he kind of visually, especially during later on, when he took over a more administrative role with doing, art corrections and stuff. I mean, the guy was just amazing. I mean, I don't really know any other way to say it.
Yeah, I think people look at the flaws and too much. And I mean, some of those ASM covers, early ones, like, oh my God, what was he thinking? That perspective is whoa. But they're not. I think a lot of that has to do with just the way that he looked at the panel, and we weren't familiar with looking at it that way, and it kind of stands out in relief, I guess. But yeah, it can't be. Yeah, it's just amazing. He was the cover artist of his time, of that window of time.
Well, what we're saying who again?
John
Romita.
John Romita in the 60s, in the
Senior.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm just thinking. There's a few guys that are. We really haven't talked about Ditko.
Yeah,
and I want to say, if it wasn't for Steve Ditko, everything at Marvel would have looked like it was Jack Kirby. And
that's a good point. That's a really good point.
Because, and that wouldn't have necessarily been a bad thing, but his Spider-Man sucked. And I just feel like, Doctor Strange, and Spider-Man are so important to Marvel. To me personally, Spider-Man always ranks higher than like FF. And maybe like Hulk is number 2 as far as like what those guys created for me personally. But yeah, Steve Ditko, he wasn't there like forever, but he's been around forever, doing stuff outside of Marvel also. And he's like, the fact that he had a different look was very important. And I want to just thank you, Steve.
Yeah.
So Perch, the last name, I think we do need to talk about Jack Kirby a little bit more. I mean, he feels like the guy that was kind of left out. Stan Lee seems to get a lot more of the credit, but Jack Kirby, he created just as much stuff as Stan Lee, if not. When you think of, he was actually the artist on a lot of this stuff. He was probably even more vital just to the creation of a lot of these characters. Yeah,
I mean, I think Jack Kirby, and it's interesting how time goes by and Kirby's impact to the industry is diminished and then brought back up again. It seems to ebb and flow. I mean, obviously, I think anybody who's been in comics and really pays attention to comics, Kirby is kind of the godfather. He's the name that everybody. Yeah, exactly. He's the legend, and I think that over time. I suspect Kirby's, reputation will grow and potentially exceed, even folks like Stan Lee. I think because, you can assign these images to him, whereas Stan Lee was a good marketer in a lot of cases. Kirby
is an idea guy.
Yeah, he's an idea guy, and Kirby you can immediately put images. You can put a style to him, and it's a style that's immediately recognizable. It's and I think with the Eternals coming out, you're going to see Disney all over it as well with Kirby style and Kirby crackle. It's amusing to me to watch Disney marketers, not Marvel marketers, Disney marketers talk about a Disney legend, Jack Kirby. So I think it always feels
it's so WWE when you do that.
Oh yeah, it feels weird. So yeah, that's a good analogy. It feels like the WWE reaching back into the past and taking credit for all the wrestlers. But anyway, I mean Kirby is he defined comics in many ways, and I think if you think about people who had such a long-lasting impact, I think it would be hard to argue somebody over Kirby in terms of an art style, because it's people always go to him. And I think in 2021, assuming the movies come back and everything else, I think there's going to be a whole giant resurgence of Kirby. You're going to see Kirby images on shirts and everything Disney can plaster that merchandise on. You're going to see it there. And we're going to live in a place where you go to Disney World and you walk into that theme park and
it's Kirby World.
And there's Kirby art, like giant Kirby
that'd
murals.
be nice.
It's
I'm going to the space section. See you later.
Yeah.
I'll go to the horror monster, one.
Yeah.
Cosmic Disney.
Yeah, you go to, with what they're doing to, and I know that with what they're doing to Epcot, I just want you to visualize everybody for a minute. If you've ever been there, they're putting that Guardians of the Galaxy ride in, and there's at least talk there's going to be this giant Kirby wallpaper. Just imagine just going to Disney as a comic fan and seeing a 30-foot tall Kirby piece of illustration there. It's going to be insane. I don't know.
Galactus has to have a ride, and he'll be like holding it up.
Oh yeah,
sweet.
So to your comment, Wes, absolutely huge impact, and I think maybe in comics the single biggest, as in terms of an artist, I think probably the single biggest impact that is at least public facing. I don't know. You can make an argument for a lot of people, but Kirby was a legend.
I do want to say this. Dark Admiral March Harris says, "Are you not monetizing?" I can't see in the super chat. I am having an issue with YouTube right now. They're supposed to send me a pin so I can remonetize my channel. I didn't get in trouble or anything like that. They just have to verify my physical address in the Philippines. And because of COVID-19, no mail is coming. Everything's getting lost right now. So unfortunately, I am not monetized. If you do want to support the channel, there is a link in the video description to my Ko-fi page. I would really appreciate that. I'm also probably going to be starting a Patreon with the next couple of weeks to help support all the stuff that I'm doing with the channel, because there are actually a lot of costs, and I have not seen one dime yet from all the money I've in theory made from YouTube, and that's been very disappointing.
The way to go. It's so much easy. Yeah,
it's probably something I need to finally to jump off on. I didn't really want to do it while all the pandemic stuff was happening, but it feels like my hand's being forced. So there is that information, and thank you for bringing that up, Dr. Dark Admiral March Hare. I do want to say this: if you're enjoying this video, this discussion, definitely give us a thumbs up. Share the video with your friends if they haven't, didn't know this was going on. I think this is a fun conversation. Now we do have to move on from the Silver Age because we got to get into the Bronze Age, probably the most influential age. Just think about what happened during the Bronze Age of comics. We've got the Comics Code Authority influence is declining. Darker stories such as the Death is when Stacy start happening. Black and female heroes start rising to prominence. Also, licensed properties like Star Wars become integral to the comic book industry. And just think about some of these things that Marvel puts out. We got Chris Claremont's Uncanny X-Men. We've got John Byrne's Fantastic Four. We've got Walt Simonson's Thor. We've got Frank Miller's Daredevil. Then over at DC, we got Marv Wolfman, and we've got the new Teen Titans with George Perez. We've also on Conan the Barbarian, you got Roy Thomas, you got Barry Windsor Smith. Just thinking about that, you're talking about maybe 6 of the 10 greatest comic book runs in the history of the industry happening in this very era right now, and it just the list goes on and on and on.
Yeah, I know. We didn't even mention Denny O'Neil or Neil Adams.
Denny O'Neil on Green Lantern, Green Arrow. Just thinking about how influential that story right there was.
Or Eastman and Laird.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's pretty awesome.
Just thinking about it, it's hard to get through.
My favorite era.
Can you talk about one creator? Everybody's going to want to talk about some creators here. Who are the creators that stand out in your mind as really defining the Bronze Age? Probably the most competitive era in comics to really get on like the Mount Rushmore of the era.
It's unfortunately it's a sucker question in the sense that it's for me it's Chris Claremont. I think Chris Claremont had the legend run of that title. He took a book and made it massive. The amount of money that was created for Marvel during that period, not just with a comic, but with merchandise and everything else that came around it.
For creators.
And for creators. Chris Claremont. Yeah, and that's a good point because, Byrne came on, obviously Cockrum, Paul Smith, John Romita Jr., who we had before, Mark Silvestri, Jim Lee. you had a lot of people come in during that era, and Barry Windsor Smith had a brief run there. Alan Davis, Art Adams. You think about the people who contributed along with Claremont. I mean, they made millionaires, they made legacies, and the X-Men, I think, lived off of the the fumes of what Claremont did for decades.
If you if you listen to Rob Liefeld's podcast, his Robservations, he was talking about this there was a section on the X-Men and the way that the line expanded. It was buying people houses in 2 months. It was wiping out every ounce of debt you had in a month.
Oh yeah.
It was one issue. Like, just doing one fill-in issue was basically life-changing money. And it caused even the direct market. Stores that were doing okay were now doing well enough just on the back of X-Men to open another retail location.
Well, or open their first. I mean, I got my start going during the period, and it well, no, not quite actually. Anyway, it was on the back of this though. It was, I mean, this was the comic run that helped launch the shop, and I think it's people, often credit Claremont with all kinds of things, but the amount, you said it, the amount of money he created, the amount of wealth, the amount of business. And if you look at these eras we're talking about, I mean, the golden age, I think, put a platform in place that gave comics longevity and gave it some strength to build off of. The Silver Age certainly had its contributions as well, as we said, getting Marvel going again. It was the Bronze Age that I think was the next huge bump, where it created a business that basically gave comics the strength to survive a lot of garbage that came over the next several years. I mean, if not for this Bronze Age and the amount of wealth and business and structure that it put in place, and certainly the creators are in tight of it, that we would not have comics today. I think the Bronze Age, not at the level we have anyway. The Bronze Age was what put comics, made comics stable.
Yeah, much credit, and Claremont deserves that credit. I'm not taking anything away from him at all. Miller and Daredevil.
Oh, sure.
I mean, that to me, that is what hooked me, was Miller's Daredevil run.
I mean, did anybody have more impactful a run than Miller?
No,
all of this time.
Oh my God! I mean, it's just my first comic that I ever bought with my own money was Daredevil 158. And, first new comic that I ever bought with my own money, buying it right off the rack. And I still remember it to this day. I was looking at all the comics there, and I was like, and just that Deathstalker cover, over the tomb, Daredevil standing there. And I was like, oh, that's it. That's the stuff right there. And that's bang, that's mine. And, but yeah, Frank Miller's run there was just, There's no run that's ever defined a character and that has catapulted a character quite like that run. That's my opinion.
And he goes over to DC and knocks it out of the park too. And he does it a few times over there. And he has his own glamour project that he does. And he's pretty. He might not have. He made Daredevil something that people like.
Yeah, I know.
Think about that, everybody.
Yeah, we're talking about a D-lister that was on his way out. I mean, it was kind of like
it was a bi-monthly book.
Yeah, I mean, you had the 130s.
Yeah,
the 130s and 140s were not a good time for Daredevil. And it's early issues 152 through 157 were very good, but 158 just ripped the knob off. It really changed everything. It's amazing.
Right. Just as long as we give Roger McKenzie a tiny bit of credit,
the tiniest.
But we're talking about Bronze Age. I said one guy that can't be overlooked is Jerry Conway, because if you go depending on where you define the end of the Silver Age and the beginning of the Copper Age, you did have the two drug stories, the one that was code approved, the one that wasn't. But even in those, nobody died. Jerry Conway killing off Gwen Stacy showed that something could happen in comics that would have a lasting impact. You're killing her. Well, until Stanley 1 month said, "What? Bring her back." And we got the Clone Saga, but that showed that comics were starting to grow up, and to and without him doing that and making that stick, the things that came after that, it provided a template for other creators to go, yeah, I can do more than just basically tell stories that reset from issue to issue. And yes, there were continuing stories in those days, but the death of Gwen Stacy brought a permanence into comic book stories that really hadn't existed before then.
Yeah.
I think one thing, getting away from capes and cowls for a second, is the amazing, unbelievable runs of horror and suspense that were going on, at that time. Bernie Wrightson's work, House of Secrets, is just staggering. His covers are absolutely gorgeous. The work that was done, every single issue of House of Mystery was just, was a masterpiece, and so much detail and so much time went in. And if you ever get a chance to go get the omnibuses of those, I highly recommend them. Probably the best, I would say, the House of Mystery. In my opinion, House of Mystery is the best horror run, the best mystery run of all time, and especially during the Bronze era.
As an anthology, I'd agree.
It's just staggering how good it is. It holds up today. The writing is top notch. The artwork drops your jaw. It's an anthology. It is just, it's the best. It's the best. And go out and get these.
And I only say that because, as a continuing story, Tomb of Dracula, I thought was the best horror series.
Yeah, I'd probably
because
they have to say Gene Colan and a lot of that then too, right?
Yeah.
And Gardner Fox wrote the first few issues.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Mm-hmm. Well, Gene Colan did a lot during this time. Also, I mean, he did Iron Man and Daredevil, and I can't even think of all the other ones. Doctor Strange.
And
he was doing a ton of stuff. And then he goes over to do Batman.
And he was so busy in the 60s, he needed 2 names to cover all of his work.
I think that embarrassingly undervalued some of those issues are. And, you go out and buy them now in high grade and put them away, and you're going to be enjoying dividends for in the not too distant future.
Ka-ching!
Oh yeah.
Make sure it's Marvel though, everybody. Don't get the DC ones. Well, maybe Batman.
What?
I guess.
How about House of Mystery?
If we're talking about Colan only, I'm sorry.
Oh no, I was talking about the
I know. Yeah, go back and get that. I mean, definitely,
absolutely,
thing and all.
Nothing better than that. Oh, somebody commented a while back. I want to touch on this real quick before we get away from it. Somebody was commenting about me getting those high-end Golden Age books slabbed and graded. Preservation is so important with those because they are not going to last forever. And of course, I needed to get a valuation on them for other purposes, but just the preservation alone, they need to be hermetically sealed. Yeah, I know it's great to have them available to flip through and everything like that, but there's a lot of these books that aren't even going to exist in 40 or 50 years that are not being taken care of now. And Action Comics #1, Detective 27, Detective 1, those they're dying by inches. Keeping them in great condition, keeping them preserved is going to keep them around for future generations. So I just wanted to touch on that now. I know that people don't like encapsulating books, and I understand it, and I agree to a point, but there's a certain line that you have to go, okay, yeah, we really need to do this, because if we don't, we're not going to have these in the future. So
makes sense to me. Definitely for that. I mean, they're falling apart already, people.
Yeah, I mean, page quality is dropping by the year on those. I see it every day. So it's important. It matters to me.
Someone in chat said Mike Friedrich and talked about Star Reach, which is that was like Chaikin and all sorts of independent Frank Brunner and people like that. I think either it was like if I'm not mistaken, it was like it ultimately became like a talent agency for comic book people. But this is where they got like their underground stuff going on, or I can't even really call it underground, but does anybody know about Star Reach and can talk about that a little bit more? Eric?
I cannot, sir.
Okay, very good. So, yeah, I just want to let you know. And Mike Friedrich, wasn't he the one that did like a Ghost Rider and stuff like that?
Mm-hmm.
Or Gary Friedrich, brother?
Yeah, he was.
Yeah. Anyway, I just wanted to mention that, but I don't know a lot about it, so I can't really speak on it too much.
Well,
Sorry.
another thing that kind of started out in the Bronze Age is brought up right here. Didn't Joe Kubert start his school during this time? Yes, a lot of schools kind of started up, and you could go to school to become a professional comic book creator. I know you wanted to be. You were an aspiring writer creator.
Oh yeah, sure.
Did you look into these schools so you could become?
Not at all. Not at all. Comics. You know, you gotta have a good artist getting in. When I wanted to get in the school, I don't know. I can't draw. It's funny. I was showing you this Brian Michael Bendis book earlier, Spunky Todd. Look it up.
Still have it. Show it to the people.
Okay, well, here you go.
Look at,
there you go. That's his art.
Spunky Todd.
Right there. Brian Michael Bendis, everybody. Yeah. So he can draw. I can't, if you call that drawing. Yeah, those schools are pretty sweet. A lot of people got their start from them. I was also thinking, like, in a sense, Neil Adams would go on and do continuity, and he kind of nurtured the talent so they all like kind of looked like he was the person drawing it. Kind of felt like a Kubert school a little bit too.
I remember they used to come out with the book Draw Up Comics the Marvel Comics way. And yeah, I tried so damn hard. And it's just I'm probably above average for a high school student, but this couldn't do it.
Yeah, moving there seemed onerous, but then I heard there was like a mail order kind of thing, and now they do it digitally, so, or like this.
So, Perch, I know you're an artist in your own right. Did you ever apply to the Kubert School?
I did not. Yeah, I probably should have or would have liked to, but no. I never. I mean, for me, it's always a hobby. So I and what's funny is I always looked at these things as you wouldn't go to these schools unless you're serious about it. You want to have a business. You want to actually make some money and make that career. It wasn't until later in my life I realized, yeah, that's not how other people thought. So I probably missed an opportunity to go do some fun stuff and study with some masters. But it is, I don't know. It was an interesting time. This was a time in comics overall where I think it wasn't a dirty word to think about the business. Like we said at the beginning, people runs were happening and people were making money and buying houses and buying cars and being on stable footing. And it wasn't kind of offensive to say you were in comics to make money. And you flash forward to today, and it's almost like it's embarrassing. People who get a good payout on a comic or buy a car. It was like Greg Capullo shows pictures of his cars, and it's like, ooh, don't show those. People are gonna look sideways at you. You shouldn't brag. It's like this was an era where people were proud of the money they were making, and that was I think that was a lot healthier. I mean, even though make no mistake about it, we often look back on this era and the era that followed it as kind of this peaceful, wonderful, like everything was perfect. Far from it. There's a million mistakes and messes, absolutely. But people were getting rich in the process. That was the big difference.
Well, I mean, most of the problems had to deal with other types of excess rather than the financial, specifically the financial excess of that time. A lot of that had to do with a lot of bad decisions involving personal relationships. But for the time, I mean, capitalism wasn't a dirty word yet. So it was a time that people were driven by the will to succeed, and that success was not looked upon as a bad thing, and there was a lot of creativity. There was a lot of creativity that bloomed from it.
Well, and there was a belief you could. I think this is, I mean, to a weird point, I won't go off on a complete sidetrack here, but it was, people who are in this industry believed if you did the right things, if you got the right books, if you were on the right, if you did that right, then you could be successful. You could be rich. And so people wanted, there was a belief that, yeah, you could make money in comics. It's not like today there's this prevailing sense of, you're never going to get rich in comics. It will, it's that Jack Kirby will break your heart kid, but that's been taken to an extreme. Whereas in this era, there was a lot more of like, yeah, we can be the rock stars. We can make the money, as well as the era that followed it. But, and Shooter was a part of it. Definitely. If people have over exaggerated Shooter a bit. That's not taking anything away from him, but it's not like Shooter was the only person that was doing this. There was a general spirit in this era of let's make a lot of money and let's make people successful.
So I do want to talk about Shooter. Obviously, he was a creator. He started out in Legion of Superheroes, I believe, when he was 14 or 15 years old over at DC Comics. He did become the editor-in-chief over at Marvel, and under his stewardship, his watch, we did get Uncanny X-Men from Chris Claremont. We did get John Byrne's Fantastic Four. We did get Walt Simonson's Thor. We did get like Daredevil from Frank Miller. How much of that do you attribute to Shooter himself? Do you think he was just lucky that those creators were all there, and they were primed to do these runs anyway, or do you think that his creative influence had a lot to do with that as well because he started out as a writer himself?
I think it helped. I think again, and don't mistake me. I think, in fact, I've got a video on Shooter coming up, I think later today or tomorrow. I don't know. It's like his background in what he was able to do and how he knew the comics, how he knew the industry. I think you look at him and maybe he took the message best to heart of if you do it right and you focus on business and you get structured and you put rules in place, then, you can be successful and you can create a framework for how comics can be made and be wildly successful. And I don't think that was necessarily rocket science, but it was not stuff other people were doing. So that was the crazy part, is that I think the template was there for everybody. And he took it, and in many cases, maybe he took it further than he should have. I mean, he definitely had enemies. I mean, John Byrne burned an effigy of him when he was removed from Marvel. So
he literally destroyed my city.
Yeah, and yeah. I mean, a lot of people forget this part because they love Byrne, and I love Byrne. But I mean, Byrne not only had a party when Jim Shooter was fired and burned a pinata that looked like him, but also then went over to Star Brand.
Yeah, and New Universe. Pittsburgh. Yep, because Shooter's a Pittsburgh kid. He grew up where I was born.
Yeah, and so it's like and granted, I mean, you're always going to have this problem of creatives meet business and that conflict. I think at the beginning of his run, Shooter balanced that maybe better, and that was, to your question, Wes, why he was so successful, because he knew how to juggle those two. And then as time went on, and there was more and more money to be made, I think he tilted more to the business side. Again, not necessarily wrong, but that kind of tilted it away from the creative side. And it's just funny. He's such a polarizing figure now where people absolutely love him. He's responsible for everything. Or you run into other corners and it's like, this man is what was the label they put him? The scourge of all comics.
Oh yeah. Yeah. He was comic Satan. I mean, I think that's one creator I remember saying.
Because he drew lines. He drew lines between just art and commercial art, and he understood that we were in commercial art.
Yeah,
selling like Zach says, selling hot dogs.
Yeah, and some of those moves were not good for business. Like, driving off Marv Wolfman, he drove off some creators. That was arguably not a smart business move because he did, get some good talent over to other places. But it wasn't. It's hard. Management's a hard job. Like literally. It's not just like you come in, you wave a magic wand, and everything's great. You break some eggs, but Shooter did obviously have a major impact in this era.
So I do want to talk about Marv Wolfman, and we're going to shoot this one over to you, Yul. When we talk about Marv Wolfman and George Perez on the new Teen Titans, obviously amazing things happening over at Marvel, some of the greatest runs ever, but one of the greatest team runs of all time is happening right there over at DC Comics. All those wonderful legacy characters that DC for some reason is kind of forsaken or would not want you to remember anymore or kind of want to destroy their characters. Got a couple of videos about that coming up today and tomorrow. One of them featuring Yul. What do you think about the new Teen Titans? I know you love that team.
I do. If it's DC in the 80s, it's new Teen Titans all the way for me. George Perez doing the art. It's funny, like when you're examining all artists after a while, and then you look back at George Perez, he can be a little stiff at times during this period. And as you get older, your art kind of loosens up and stuff. But even still, with the work that he did on Crisis during this time, and then New Teen Titans, some of my all-time favorite stuff. All the characters that they introduced, Cyborg, Terminator, or whatever, Deathstroke, whatever they're calling him today. Reimagining Beast Boy, Changeling, Starfire, all the villains, Brother Blood. Whew. Some of my favorite stuff. Definitely great stories. The heel turn of some of the characters I didn't see coming because I was still young enough to not really, I could buy in 100%. And it was. Whew, I have all the omnibus right here. I have all the issues over here. I'm a proud collector. Teen Titans on the wall.
So, Breen, I want to ask you about this. I'm sure you've read the Judas Contract.
Yes.
All right, Breen. When you read it, and Tara is kind of seducing Deathstroke, who's clearly in his 40s or 50s. She's 15 or 16. There's a lot of close-ups on her nether regions. There's a lot of insinuations that the two are having relations, and she's maybe manipulating him doing that. And it made me uncomfortable being an adult, in his 30s reading that. What are your feelings on all that?
Dames is grief, Sammy. There's no man that can't be brought down by you know what. I mean, that was again. That was, at the time, it was like you just didn't see that in in mainstream comics. And I mean, two things I said. Underage relations. You had and as we're reading the book, I mean, in those days, you're reading along with that series, and you go, okay, when this story ends, she's gonna see the light, turn on Deathstroke. She's gonna, it's gonna have a happy ending.
Beast Boy is gonna be with her.
No, it didn't. So
No.
And the fact that I said, because they set it up so well. She had a brother who was a member of the Outsiders, who was as pure as the driven snow, and that she was just batshit crazy evil, and they didn't put that genie back in the bottle. That, like I said, it just I mean that title was so good, and from issue 1 through the end of that, I mean you can't beat that, and that's a large part of why.
Yeah, I think that it was just a different time too. I mean, you had a time when I think that I think today we think of women as being a bit older as far as when they reach their maturity, and back then maybe it was a little younger, 16 or so, and maybe 15 even. I think a lot of our laws are kind of based on that even still to this day.
It's about when most of them were established.
Right. And my grandmother got married at 14, maybe 13 actually. It was a different time, and I think we're a little bit more sensitive to it today.
And she's Markovian anyway. I don't know what their laws are.
Or what their biology really works like.
Oh, that's a good point.
Yeah, I mean, Baby Yoda's 50 years old. He clearly can't consent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, there you go. It struck me as kind of odd, although it's amazing story arc of wonderful run. Rivals anything, obviously, that was going over at Marvel. But we're going to have to move on. There's so much to talk about in the Bronze Age. It's just, it's such an amazing era for comic books. So I know there's a lot of debate on what the ages are and the years and all that stuff. There's too many descriptions out there for the ages and everything. I wanted 5 ages, and I went with my timelines, and that's what you're going to get. I'm sorry if it upsets people in the comments section, but this is what I'm going with. We're going on to what could be called the Dark Age or the Extreme Age, 1985 to 2000. Also, 1998 is probably a better ending point for it, but we're going to go with that one. In this time frame, we get The Watchmen, The Dark Knight Returns in the very early portion, Crisis on Infinite Earths, resets DC continuity. We also get Vertigo Comics, the British invasion which is pretty much kind of set up everything that we're getting kind of, in Image Comics and a lot of independents nowadays. And we get the rise of superstar artists that lead to the formation of Image Comics, when they left the Spider-Man, the X-Men line at Marvel Comics and went over there and created Image, the speculator boom and the subsequent collapse. A lot of things happening in this time frame. Doc, who do you think are the most influential creators of the Dark Age or Extreme Age, whatever you want to call it?
Honestly, I'd go with probably Jim Lee. He wasn't, like, right in the beginning, he wasn't. But as he went on, he let's see, he ended up taking X-Men to even bigger heights. He also negatively was responsible for pushing Claremont out and essentially ending the Claremont era of X-Men. Then he left and went and joined the Image guys, but then he split off into and kind of established Wildstorm. Now, he already had a studio before that, Homage Studios. Homage Studios existed back whenever they were still doing all the Marvel work. Because if you go look at some of those old X-Men books, it would say art by Homage. And but then he came back for the Heroes Reborn, and according to the some of the information that's coming out now, he was basically a hair width away from running Marvel, and Marvel acquiring Wildstorm, essentially relocating it to the offices to La Jolla. But then that falls through. He leaves the Heroes Reborn stuff. He establishes and then he gets bought up by DC. And the late 90s, up until that early 2000 era, that was, I mean, you look at some of like the Ellis era Wildstorm stuff, and almost all of the creators that come in the next era after this came out of Jim Lee's Wildstorm Studios. All the big ones came out of there. That's where they got their start. I think he is the most quintessential creator. Maybe not right at the beginning, but throughout the duration of it, for out of those 15 years, probably 12 of them.
Yeah, I would agree with that. The latter part, yeah, he's most probably the most important creator. The latter part of the era, as Wes has defined it. Yeah.
That 85 to 2000, I'd say it's Jim Lee.
All right, Perch, do you agree with that? Is it Jim Lee? Is it Alan Moore? Is it Frank Miller?
I mean, it's an interesting era because I don't think you have kind of one name that rises above others. You have people who made their contributions. I agree with the comments that were made by Jim Lee, and I think what we've seen in the last 20 years or so maybe has reinforced that point of what he put in place. But I think, you got to throw Alan Moore in that mix. You have to throw Neil Gaiman in that mix. I think Grant Morrison probably has a role. I'm thinking about the 90s. And especially the later half of the 90s, because a lot of people will say, "Oh, the 90s were the best era in comics," and they forget like that whole second half of the 90s, which were like the near death of comics.
Image kept announcing all these comics, and they would get all the pre-orders, and they would never come out. And
I mean, I understand I'm looking at it from a retailer perspective, but man, that second half of the 90s was one bumpy run. I mean, you could this is going to be just where's Larry when we need him? I mean, you could argue that Steve Jeppy was obviously not a creator, but definitely had a moment.
Comic book angel?
The comic book angel, that
sweet comic book.
Yeah, I mean, we're not saying great people, but we're saying people who had an influence, wrapping up and buying off Capital City and basically putting a chokehold on things. I don't know. Joe Quesada's name is in there. I think that there's, it has to be like Todd McFarlane. I think as probably as an artist. I'm trying to think if there was an artist more powerful and influential than Todd McFarlane, because he did spawn so many other styles that aped him. And in his books were just, for a comic shop, you did not have to think about if they would sell or not. You ordered. Yeah, Dale Keown was. I mean, there's a lot of really good selling artists, but I mean, if Todd McFarlane's name was on it, it sold. And it sold buckets and buckets of comics, more than any of the other Image creators, I think.
Even Liefeld?
Oh yeah. No, Todd's still on Liefeld. Yeah, I know.
But Todd never worked on like cable. Liefeld could move 1 million issues of cable.
Yeah, I think Liefeld, and this is not taking away from Liefeld. I know this gets heated on Twitter and so on, but Todd, it just Todd Spider-Man issues. There was never, more than any other creator, you could not order enough of those books. And whether Todd moved on to something else, it didn't matter. It sold. It just
when I went to the comic shop when Amazing Spider-Man number 300 came out, I went to the comic book store. The diamond boxes that were on the floor were Amazing Spider-Man 300.
Yeah.
And there were 5 diamond boxes on the floor.
Yeah.
And all of them were gone by Friday.
You did not. This sounds ridiculous, but there was a time in the comic shops, like with when he launched Spider-Man himself, or even when he went to Spawn. But I remember I would bring the boxes in, and I would put them on the floor or on a little counter, and we wouldn't take the comics out. There was no point taking them out of the box. It's just people would come and get out of the box. Like the Spawn's in here. Spawn number 1 is just in here. Just grab it, and it's like. I should go back and look at some of my old order forms. I ordered so much of that comic. So from an art perspective, Todd just sold whatever he was on. Is insane. And this is a great one by Atomic Count. Peter David as a writer, absolutely. And those old fights between Peter David and Todd McFarlane, or Peter David and Eric Larson, those were epic too. That was the beginning of the Twitter drama right there.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah.
Oh,
the Peter David Hulk era is just, it's still to me is the best Hulk. Period. Still.
Peter
I
agree
with that.
Yeah. Well, up until the Pantheon, I couldn't stand that part.
The Pantheon.
But, yeah, it just yeah.
Well, when you got Professor Hulk, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that sucked. Yeah.
377 is kind of when I think that Hulk generally ends for me.
That was jumping the shark a bit.
I'd still take it today. I know people are all over Al Ewing, but I would, if you put Peter David back in, I'd let him do whatever he wants.
Well, Ewing jumped the shark at 25. So
yeah, it took
Hulk 25.
Took Peter David like 80 issues to jump the shark.
Yeah,
took him a lot longer.
Yeah, the thing is, I'm a big Grant Morrison fan, so he was doing a lot of the Vertigo type stuff like Doom Patrol and Invisibles during this time. He also did JLA. A lot of people love his JLA, so he can do mainstream style stuff, and that's why I'm so accepting of his like out there things, because when he brings it to the mainstream, it's just something a little different than you're going to get from almost any other person. Sometimes it's a little try hard, I understand, but
yeah,
he's pretty important. As a guy that likes writing, Grant Morrison's definitely one of my top guys.
I put writing first. That's just me, but I think I can understand people putting art first.
I think that's why we kind of like the writer artist, the person that can do both.
Oh yeah, and I'm gonna touch on that.
Glory.
I'm gonna touch on that. I have 2 names. One of them has been mentioned, the other one has not. And I will start out with the first one is Dave Sim, Cerebus. I know that's Bronze Age, but it really hit its stride going into this era, and in the Copper era, in the or Dark era, whatever you call it. But man, that's an amazing series at the time, hitting Church and State, and then he goes, he goes directly, high society first and then Church and State. That is the most amazing independent era of comics for me. An independent run of comics for me is that run of Cerebus, and from issue 25 to 100 is just staggering. Amazing writing. The artwork is incredible. The backgrounds that Gerard did, and Dave Sim was actually starting to finally find his style. And the stories were incredible. Amazing satire. Very, very well done. Just the best independent comic to me, the best independent comic that's ever been written. But that made the independent comics boom, in my opinion, is selling, because Cerebus sold 50, 100,000 copies. No independent comic had done that before. and it sold well. It was able to tell stories that pushed the envelope, and that was Dave Sim. And
did it
out of
sell better
Kitchener,
after
Ontario.
Turtles?
Huh?
Did it sell better after Turtles? Because
Yeah, it did.
Black
It
and
did.
Whites were
Yeah, Black and White explosion happened.
Black and Whites were way better than the sales today.
They were.
Oh, yeah.
And that was what was so amazing. I loved the Black and White era because I really got into Aircell, and you had Aircell publications. You had, of course, you had
Well, Dark Horse was Black and White a lot.
Kitchen
at times.
Sink.
Yeah.
I mean, you had
like Milk and Cheese and
Fantagraphics was a company during this
Fantagraphics
time,
Press,
and Love and
wow.
Rockets was coming out. There's a lot of independent creators. I'm a big Hate fan by Peter Bagg, and those autobiographical comics were coming out during this time. Also, Drawn and Quarterly was made on those.
was Ghost World come out in this era?
That'd be Dan Clowes. And Dan Clowes, I mean, he might be one of them. You could actually put him really high on the list if you look at it that way, because he's had a significant run in movies, and he was even on a Simpsons episode.
Yeah, I remember when I went, my copy of TMNT #1 came out, and first print, the comic shop got 3 copies in. He'd ordered 10 and it got shorted to 3. I grabbed one. I got one of them. And my friends gave me such grief for buying something called Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. It's $1.50, man. What are you doing?
And those guys made so much money selling that cash cow out. I mean, that cash turtle out.
Oh yeah. Cash turtle. But and everybody made fun of me. You could get 2 copies of Teen Titans. You could get a copy. What are you doing? And I was like, this is awesome, man. This is going to be big. And everybody mocked me. I've got it over here on the wall, but and just an amazing series too. Eastman and Laird, you can't beat them. That was the defining era, and we would not have independent comics the way we have today if it was not for Dave Sim. That's my opinion. And just because he had the will and he had the moxie to get in there and do it. And the second name I'm going to mention, Frank Miller, Dark Knight Returns. That, apart from the Image explosion, I remember Dark Knight Returns came out, first print. It sold so damn fast. The first print sold out so quickly that they were planning the second print the day after the first print came out. And it could not get to the stores fast enough. It was the first comic to ever have a second print before #2.
Dude, we bought so many of those, my dad and me.
Oh, God.
He was a collector guy, right? So we get 5 at least of everything, and we got a ton more than 5.
And nobody bought multiple issues until then. Really, I mean, until The Dark Knight Returns, people weren't buying multiple issues as a force, as a regular thing. And it was an expensive book. It was a damn expensive book. $2.50 was not cheap, and people were buying 8 copies. Yeah. They were buying as many as they could grab off the shelves, and I would grab 3 of each. And I never did that.
We got more Ronins though. I just
So I did want to bring up an interesting point. I'll talk to you about this one, Perch. Obviously, the Image creators they started over at Marvel. They're hugely influential. They said, "You're not paying us enough. We're going to start our own thing, and it's going to be this big, artist-centric line. It's all going to be all about their art." But really, it's everything that happened at Vertigo beforehand that has really influenced what Image is today. It wasn't the bombastic art style that they brought over. It ended up being the types of stories and characters created over at Vertigo in the British Revolution that really influenced what Image is currently. Isn't that weird?
Yeah, no, it's true. I mean, Image, it definitely has 2 parts to it. I mean, there was the beginning, which was a lot of attention, and I think you could argue that the attention it got, it put it on its map, it gave it a foundation, and it gave it something to build off of, and it probably could not have happened as fast and as quick if they hadn't led with the art and led with that kind of flashy bit to itself. But then it pivoted. I mean, especially as things kind of fell apart in the 90s and we got into the 2000s, Image became much more story driven. It became kind of the original goal of kind of how the market was there for creators and what they were trying to curate. And that's where you saw The Walking Dead and other things kind of come in. But it's definitely a story of two companies in many ways. But I think I've had this discussion with people before. If it had gone the other way, they would not have grown anywhere close. And it's questionable if they would have survived the 90s, if they would have started with, without the flash of the art and the kind of the big name.
I don't think so. No.
Yeah, I don't think it would have survived.
I'm going to disagree on that, only because it was their own actions that caused the 90s collapse to really happen.
Yeah,
them missing
the excess.
No, it's not even that. It's them missing their ship dates.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. By the way, I'm just saying it's they were able to land within the course of like 6 months and be seen as a major player in comics, and no other indie had been able to pull that off. And I think the only way they were able to do that is that they had the big names, they had the flashy art, they had the story, their story, not what they were putting in the comics. Mm-hmm. And that allowed them to jump up in terms of credibility. Now they then proceeded to not ship on time and just the mess that followed did help bring the industry down, but they still were able to weather that and survive, whereas a lot of the indies just kind of got a ceiling placed over them during that time.
Oh, and absolutely.
So it's an interesting company. By the way, people have been mentioning really great names. Sam Keith, absolutely. Jim Starlin, I can't believe I hadn't heard that up earlier. Obviously, he had a major impact in this. And I put in the chat, Louise Simonson, who always seems to get overlooked from everyone, including Marvel.
She's my favorite.
Yeah, she's my favorite.
Wheezy.
It drives me crazy that Marvel does these retrospectives from time to time, at least a couple times a year, of like kind of the legends of X-Men, and they bring all these people and they'll dig all over the place and just skip Wheezy every time.
Innocenti.
Well, most people think of when they think of Wheezy, they think of Thor, and that was an amazing run. I mean, you can't.
Sure.
I mean, it made Thor popular again. Otherwise, the title probably would have been canceled.
I just it drives me. I know this is my own little pet peeve to grind, but it's like Marvel is so big right now about look, we're hiring non-white male creators, and it's like, hey, you were hiring some really awesome women creators back
in 1984.
Yeah, 25 years ago, you had some of the best in the business, and like you think you want to bring them up a little bit because you could make an argument you were the trendsetter, but you always forget like Ann Nesenti, absolutely Wheezy, but Wheezy, like some of my favorite comics of all time came from her hand, and I anyway.
Yeah.
The last thing I do want to talk about before we move on to the next era, I want to send this one over to you, Breen. Obviously, likely the most influential comic story that ever came out of this is Alan Moore's Watchmen. You still feel the effects today. Obviously, The Dark Knight Returns falls into that as well. But in my opinion, probably Alan Moore's better work is the Saga of the Swamp Thing, and the work that he did with Stephen Bissett on that. Just the expressionism in the art and everything was just amazing. What are your thoughts on Alan Moore and his work here?
Well, okay, his work on Watchmen, can't be understated because of, what it did for the industry. Swamp Thing obviously is still read and highly thought of today. But if you don't mind, I one name I want to bring up, or a couple, was Wolfman and Perez for Crisis, and John Byrne, who hasn't been mentioned yet, for Man of Steel, because that transformed DC from a company of basically single stories that you forgot about when the next issue came out, and DC finally became a cohesive universe that which Alan Moore's Swamp Thing was a part of, because that was in regular continuity. But it gave as a longtime reader, and I'd already had 10 years in when Crisis came out, and DC finally became an actual comic book universe, and they spent the next several years doing events back when they mattered, like Legends, Invasion, Millennium, Final Night, No Man's Land. And I didn't want Byrne to get ignored, when we're talking about influential people in this era. But but as far as Alan Moore's Swamp Thing, that it was incredible. I mean, what more can you say about other? I mean, I said it's that character. Everybody that's written that character to this day still uses Moore's version as a template.
Yeah, if you look at the beginning of the Saga of the Swamp Thing, people, I've kind of directed people who really getting into comics and getting into stories, story-driven comics. I said, go and read the first 20 issues, the first 19 issues of Saga of the Swamp Thing. I said, and then read the next 20 and get back to me and tell me how much story matters. And they come back, they're just like, oh my God, it blows their minds, the difference, that within just one title, it like that. And it's incredible. It really is. It's the best, that's the best mystery run as far as within that era, in my opinion, is that time. I think it's better. I think it's better than Sandman. I think it's better than the others.
There's so many great names during this period. I mean, we could just go on and on. I think this era. Yeah.
This is the era that turned between this and Bronze. This is the era that made almost every comic creator or comic reader that is currently watching this stream or in existence.
Well, it was an indication, kind of like we were talking about earlier, where you have eras that build a platform, and then the era that follows it really mines that platform. I think the Silver Age took advantage of a lot of things that were done in the Golden Age that allowed it to be as big as it was. And I think the Bronze Age kind of set and teed things up that made a lot of this possible. I think that a lot of the British invasion, I think a lot of what was done with Morrison and Gaiman and the indie world of a lot of really kind of great creators being able to come out and say indie world. I don't mean like image, I mean truly indie stuff that was coming out. I think it was, the Bronze Age teed this stuff up. And you have to have that in comics, and maybe it leads into our next one, but that you have to have these eras that build value, and then you have to have eras that take that value and capitalize on it. And the worrisome part for comics is you see this definite trend. If you look at the history, where you see building value, creating a platform, capitalizing on that value, one and then the other. And now we're about to go, I think, into the next era where there's a giant question mark.
Yes,
it's time to come into the latest. Some would call it the modern era. Some would call it the movie era. Probably starts around 1998, but 2000 to present give us a nice fat number of about 21 years to work with. I don't know when I think of modern comics and the best creator, the name that pops in my head is Jeff Johns. I think he's the best writer of his era. Who's the name that kind of pops in your mind?
I might need to think about this. Oh no, God no!
Oh, you're hurt.
I think I just stick with Morrison going through until I can think of someone I want to jump in. If we're talking just writing, this is yeah, maybe it is Bendis, because I'm gonna fight for Bendis right now, guys. Here we go. Boom.
I'm with you. People hate it, but
he is the most influential.
He starts off by doing stuff like Torso. He starts off, doing Jinx, and these are all, in tune with like how Vertigo is going to go with their 100 bullets and stuff like that. So he's already ahead of the game. And then he does Sam and Twitch, and he does like a Spawn book and stuff like that. And then he goes to Marvel, and then he takes control, and he does everything that he does, for good or bad. Some good, a lot bad. But I think the bad is more towards the tail end of his career. And everybody has something that they like to latch onto during his Marvel beginnings. So, yeah, if it's not Jeff Johns, who did the thing about Jeff Johns is that he went high and hard fast, and then he's gone. And there's a lot of reasons for that, because of and I think Bendis.
Oh, it's true. I think we're talking influential. We're not talking what everybody loves. Bendis, definitely influential. The other name I think in the same boat is that defined the event era and sold a crap load of comics for Marvel was Mark Millar. I think that's another guy who redefined how a lot of this stuff worked. Again, love him or hate him.
Also, taking his properties, spinning them over to Netflix, and moving on to greener pastures, which is what every creator wants to do.
Yeah, he built that roadmap that everybody else is trying to recreate and failing at. But Millar is, and I think we, in the next era, if you talk about, again, this idea of building value, maximizing value, the person who's probably set up the best in many respects is Millar, who got this deal, put it in place in Netflix. If they do start cranking on those comics, if they ever actually do come out, we're looking at another decade where a lot of superhero films and the properties are going to be done there. Millar is going to be at the center of that. You're talking about a very influential person.
Jonathan.
All right, Perch, what happened with the live stream yesterday? Someone asked.
It couldn't do it. Just the last minute thing that just didn't happen. Sorry about that, everybody.
Life happens.
Life happens.
There you go.
Crazy event.
So what about this one? I think Tevye has brought up a very, very good one, very influential. Obviously, Robert Kirkman, just what he did with Invincible, The Walking Dead, getting on AMC. Everybody would like to be in Robert Kirkman's shoes nowadays.
I think he is a good fit for this, except for the fact that especially he is kind of defining this current era in that Marvel and DC don't matter. Or he's trying to create a world where Marvel and DC don't matter.
Dude, he's even made the internet not matter. People have worked on a year's worth of comics and nobody knew about it until it came out that day.
Yeah.
That's pretty amazing these days.
Yeah, where everybody's going on every half page, they're like, "Oh, look, I've got another half page done."
Yeah. He's like, "No, don't do that. Don't do that. I'm paying you. Shut up."
Yep.
And he pays people.
He actually does.
He actually pays people. I think that you could make a strong argument that Kirkman and Millar are the two that over the next 20 years are going to be the people who dictate a lot of what happens in comics.
It's funny because Bendis wishes he could be those two guys because every time he tries to get into TV and movies, it never works.
He's stuck with his company though. He did the comic book thing and
James World.
Yeah. Well, it just. Yeah.
Well, the other problem is, and it doesn't get discussed because we all usually focus on what he's putting on the page, and fortunately, he put so many words on the page. There's a lot to talk about, but Bendis has a terrible reputation amongst editors and peers, and especially lower level people, for blowing off meetings and not getting back to people, and just he has a very negative reputation for that kind of stuff. And so if you look at that, I mean, Kirkman, for everything else, and there's been, many different comments, he does pay people. He has a generally guy net positive. A lot of people are annoyed by Millar, but he too has made people, and people remember that Millar made them a millionaire in some cases because of the deals he struck. And so it helps. I mean, the reality is if you're going to grow up in corporate ranks, you're going to need some support. And if you've let this trail of bodies because your ego got going before your career, it's gonna hurt. And I think that's what happened with Bendis. He does not have that same trust in the network.
He's stuck at being a big fish in a small pond and was never able to jump up to that next pond the way that Kirkman and Miller have.
It's interesting. Black Cat brings up a name here, and people might not like it. I'm throwing this one to you, Brain. But Gail Simone, she basically took an online blog where she bitched about women being frigid and was talking about comics, and used that to catapult herself into the industry and become a prominent writer and someone that a lot of people look up to. Set the pathway for Donny Cates, Matthew Rosenberg. A lot of the creators in the industry right now have taken the path that Gail Simone paid for them and showed them how to use.
Oh, and then she trashed it all by sitting on her laurels and not making anything decent for like a decade.
She did. It's true though. She did reset, and arguably this is a negative. I think she did reset how.
I think it's a negative.
Oh, yeah, she changed how talent is found in comics, and that's definitely been a huge impact for the era. Not a good one.
Yeah, bitch and play victim.
Yeah, well, I mean, yes, but beyond that,
until you get a job, and then don't actually fix any of the things you were complaining about.
Yeah, sure, but yes, but I mean, the thing I think Wes is aiming at here is that it's the route for how you get into being in comics changed to, make a blog, make some noise, in some case, make some, cancel noise or outrage noise. And that's how you can get into comics. And that has taken hold in a major way. And so that's
and we all continue to reap the rewards.
Yeah, exactly.
The one that I would go with, though, is oddly enough Warren Ellis. First of all, he established that Wildstorm style in the late 90s, early 2000s, which launched into the Authority and Planetary, which is essentially when Marvel decided to create their Ultimate line to basically save themselves. They basically went over to Wildstorm and stole all the talent that they could. The Ultimates only exists. The Avengers movies only exist because of the Ultimates, and the Ultimates only exist because of the Authority, and the Authority only exists because of Warren Ellis. And plus the fact that you have like the Warren Ellis message boards. All of the creators that have gotten into the industry. I mean, mostly
not
for
just
works.
Creators, it's executives, it's writers, editors.
Yes, editors. All of these people that have gotten into the industry, almost all of them, you can trace them back to the Warren Ellis message boards. He he had so much impact, especially when it comes to the movies. A lot of the stuff that he introduced in comics ended up becoming very big fuel for the movies.
Sure.
And
all right.
And he also knew how to show a lady a good time.
Apparently so.
So here's a couple more names, and all throughout the first one would be Brian Pulido, Richard Meyer, Ethan Van Sciver, kind of showing the blueprint that you don't even need to use publishers. You can go direct to consumer with Kickstarter or Indiegogo. Use a crowdfunding route. You go out there, you build your own audience, not through traditional means. You go and you create it. And then you just do it all in-house.
Yeah. Okay.
I think that's valid.
Yeah.
Yeah. People are doing that.
Now,
yeah, they are
waiting
doing
for my
that.
Octobriana to come in from Jim Rugg.
No, I mean, but then you had Todd McFarlane showing them how to do it better.
Well, Todd McFarlane.
Todd McFarlane has a much bigger staff.
Spider-Man 300.
But now I guess we'll see long term whether or not Richard and EVS and all the rest of them.
Well, we're seeing Sean Gordon Murphy follow suit. We're seeing Scott Snyder following suit. We're seeing Jeff Lemire following suit.
We're still in some bigger names make big money. I think for sure.
No, I'm talking about long term. You're still all looking short term. 2-3 years, that's short term. I'm talking 10 years from now, 15 years from now.
I agree with you, Doc. I think that crowdfunding is a stepping stone, and a lot of people are view it as kind of the next new way. It's not the next. It's not the end state. There is a state after this, and that doesn't hit any single person. Whenever I say things like that, I always get people like, why are you insulting EBS? It's nothing to do with EBS. It's crowdfunding is still in its infancy of what it's going to become, and it's going to transition to something else. It's going to evolve. It's not going to be this way forever, and so I think. And like you said, Doc, I think looking at that's a 10-year, 15-year, we're look at all these eras we've done. They've all been 15, 20-year kind of time frame. We're moving into another one. What that next one's going to be like is what we need to think about.
Yeah, I don't think that the creators, I don't think that the Indiegogo creators and the Kickstarter creators are actually thinking that far ahead. That you can tell that by the offerings that they have, that they're not, they're not really looking at 2030 or 2025 even. They're looking at, can I get the next book out anywhere close to where I'm supposed to. So that's just my opinion, but I just don't think that. I think that if they were, they would be looking at unifying. They would be looking at trying to really get an image type situation. They'd be trying to unify together to make themselves a little bit more stable and sustainable.
Right. And all these eras have like little transitional bubbles leading from one era to the next. And this crowdfunding thing has really gotten big in like the last 3 years. And this would be a bubble if it didn't happen tomorrow, or even the next 2 years, if you're looking at decades and things like that. And it's kind of hard to see where, to know exactly. Like the crowdfunding might be totally different. You have no idea. And maybe they won't even be doing it that way in the future. It'll be just something else.
Yeah. I think, as somebody's mentioned, we all kind of look at these are large time frames, these eras, but I don't think anybody knows exactly where that era is going to take them yet, anywhere near the beginning. And if we are in the beginning, say it's 2015 or 2017 through X as going to be the new modern era, and the 2000 through 2017 gets renamed to something else, however it ends up getting broken down, there will be an interesting, I don't think anybody knows when at the start of each era where that era will take them.
I think that we can look at it and see Donny Cates, his introduction at Marvel, the stories that he started now, and the when he's taken over those titles, he will be. I think, I know that a lot of people have some issues with him. He blocks people and he does stupid shit, but I think he will be the influential writer of this era, and he will be looked upon as the big mover and the rock star of this era, because he already is, and he sells books. I mean, like no other out there right now.
Yeah, but so did Bendis for a while.
Yeah, but
Bendis ruled an era. I mean, I'm that is interesting. I'd love to have a longer conversation with you, Paley, about this. I don't buy it yet with Cates, but what you're saying is completely right. I mean, he sells books and everything else. It's hard to tell longevity wise, but keep in mind, and this is the trap that we all fall into. There's people that we may not like. That doesn't, just because we don't like them doesn't mean they're not influential. And Bendis ruled an era. I mean, make no mistake about it.
Yeah.
He did. And so I think that the next era is not going to be kind to him. I think that time is over. So who's that next person going to be? It doesn't magically just mean it's going to be somebody we like. Of course not. It's going to be somebody who knows how to use the era to their advantage and who's able to ride it to success. And that can be somebody that everybody loves. It can be somebody everybody hates. That doesn't really factor into it.
I agree. And in my opinion, it's the weakest era. But he did rule an era. You're right.
Yeah.
All right, Yul. Do you think James Tynion is he going to be vying with Donny Cates for the man that rules an era? With his work on Batman.
No, none of these guys are long for this.
Somebody is. There's nobody.
I guess Tynion's then for the long haul. I could see Scott Snyder going on and doing something else.
None of these people are rock stars. They don't have the personality.
It's funny, like so this era is all writers, it seems, whereas before we
Capullo's
were fading over
Capullo, yeah. He's close.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'd call him rock star, but he's definitely a rising star.
There's nobody like it used to be, and that's just old people.
Well, rising now. Actually,
but I don't know. I don't think there's nobody. I remember when Frank Miller did a cover, it's 10 cents more because it's a back issue, or whatever it was back in the time. Frank Miller did this book. Now, if someone goes and does a comic book, the comic book might sell out, but that's just because it's sold to who was going to buy it anyway. Somebody coming, maybe a cover, variants and things like that. I just don't. There's very few people from today that are going to. Jeff Shaw is doing a book. Everybody, you're going to run for it.
Who the hell is Jeff
Shaw? Scott Campbell that can sell books just on his cover alone rather than what's inside of them nowadays.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So. There's no interior artists that I'm like. There are people that I would like to see. Frank Whiteley, Grompa doing some interiors. That'd be like, whoa, that's very interesting. But that's not going to bring everybody to buy those books these days.
Yeah, the only time I've seen really something like that go forward was when was the Black Label Batman. God, my mind just went damned. That blew people's shit. That blew their minds when they opened that up. Well, even beyond the Batwing, but it did. That's the first time I've seen in a long time that the interior art is the first time that I'd seen in a long time that the interior art just really pushed sales.
I don't know, does anyone else have anything else to say about the modern age, the movie age, and what we've seen, like as far as influential creators? Is it time to wrap this up? What?
Yeah, I'll just say real quick that I agree with you on Jeff Johns, and I can't believe I'm going to say this. I agree about Bendis too, because you start with Ultimate Spider-Man, but the thing I want to talk about real quick was the 5-year period at Marvel between House of M through Siege. And whether you like the way some of the characters were presented, and the hero versus hero ended up becoming a done to death trope. Creatively, that's a hard era to beat. And at DC, you had the couple-year build up to Infinite Crisis because there was so much talent at both companies at those times, and you're never going to get that again because something View of Uranus brought up. The gatekeepers will make sure that nobody can get too big for their britches. There's too many subject matters and art styles that are taboo for the same reason. And what we've had through all these years, in mainstream comics is essentially over. And that's why you're seeing so much crowdfunding being done. But the problem with that is all the great crowdfunding in the world doesn't make those characters Batman, Superman, Spider-Man, Captain America. And as collectors and readers, we want our big two characters, and I don't think we're ever going to get them the way we had them throughout all the eras that we've talked about today.
Yeah, you got the present era, the woke era. Unfortunately, I think it will be known as, and it's just,
that.
All right, well, Yule, do you have anything else to sign us off? It sounds like we're giving eulogies here.
No, not at all. There's lots of good stuff going forward. There's nothing I can really look. I'm just going to say Morrison again. He'll
Brubaker
tomorrow. I'm going to be super happy about Brubaker for sure. He's
there are bright lights in the darkness,
without a doubt. Absolutely. There's always great stuff, and there's always good artists. It's just that right now there's just it's more writer heavy. They did a very good job squashing them after Image at Marvel and DC. Absolutely. And with a few exceptions like Capullo, there's no real artist. Maybe Jeff Lemire. He's a writer that arts also, and he does some really good stuff. That might be a guy I would, point at going forward. And he seems to be really into comics and is going to stick around for a while. He's doing the crowdfunding and all that other stuff. They're just good people. There's good people. They're just
Ryan Stegman out there. There are good things. So we get way too hung up just in general on social media about how everything is going to crap and everything. But there is plenty out there you can enjoy. Every week when Wes does his comics you should read, there's always stuff at the top. I mean, there's always something out there. You just maybe have to dig for it, and that sucks, but it is what it is.
I see how X-Men plays out.
I think the one thing that this era and the next era is going to need to do is not fall into the trap of guys like Stegman. Okay, he's killing it on Venom, and then they pull him off and only have him doing event books.
Yep.
When he needs, you need these guys, these superstars, putting work out every single month, not just on event books. And that's what they need. They need, the superstars. I know that Marvel's and DC as well are terrified of another Image exodus, but they need to rebuild their actual rock stars on the art side. They really do. They've been pushing. They got rock star writers. They do. But they need to have rock star artists too, and that they promote equally.
Yeah, and I think we'll get there. I do think that the next era is going to have a bit of a rise of the artist. I don't subscribe to the idea that it's all dead and it's over and it's coming to a part. I don't think so. Money is still out there to be made, and as long as there's money that's out there to be made, there are going to be people who are going to try. Now, will there be gatekeepers? Absolutely. There's going to be some people who are going to want to prevent every moment of this from happening. But push comes to shove, people do like money. And there are still people out there, certainly in these companies, who like money. And as painful as a lot of this stuff is with DC and AT&T likes money. Trust me, they are fond of money. And there will be changes. Yeah.
Money's good.
It will happen. Again, it may be bumpy. It may not be all perfect, but I think I love walking through this today because in every era, there's been times. I mean, I remember having these conversations in the late 80s, in the 90s, and the 2000s about how comics was going to die in the next 3 years because everything was screwed. And comics finds a way. And so, it's bumpy, but it does.
Yeah, I think the present
That's who you
bloodbath
really
that we're
are.
seeing, the present bloodbath we're seeing now will reap benefits later.
Damn it!
And absolutely, Sean Gordon Murphy. He's a great talent too.
You walked over my calling perch Jeff Goldblum joke.
People have done that.
So I do want to thank everybody that's been in the comments section. It was very live. Everyone has opinions. I'm sorry, we couldn't agree on dates or whatever, but I think we were able to give up 5 different eras, kind of talk about them in depth. And the panel absolutely brought the heat today. Breen, thank you so much for coming in here. I know you had to work, you had to move mountains to be here today, and I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
And you'll obviously thank you so much for joining me. We'll be talking tomorrow for some content for next week.
All right, can't wait.
And obviously, Doc, the Marvel historian here, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you too, brother. Thanks everybody in the chat.
Absolutely, they were on fire today. Pele, thank you so much for joining us, bringing us some of the curmudgeon and talking about some of those amazing golden age comics in your collection.
That's everybody has a passion, and that's one of mine. And I absolutely love the history and love the subject matter. And if you don't love comics, then why are you listening to this?
You wouldn't be here for 2 hours if you didn't. And finally, Perch, thank you so much. I know you've had a lot of stuff going on. You ended up missing your stream last night. You've been super busy, but made a little bit of time for us. And it was a great conversation all around.
No, I loved it. I love talking about this stuff. I like getting the historical perspective because it does put it in perspective. And I mean, put it this way, you could see the love of comics in this industry. Because clearly, we went the entire show. Pele and I agreed the entire time.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
See that?
Well, mostly.
Love fest.
It's a big,
well, you didn't start fighting.
No big argument. Yeah. So this is.
I try to get along.
Comics brings people together. It can.
Absolutely. And I do want to say I agree with you of Uranus. Yule Carter was wrong essentially the entire time. Thank you. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. It was a great conversation and really appreciate it. If you didn't get to see the whole thing, you're going to want to go back to the beginning. We had a great conversation.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Smash the like button if you watch through this and give us some love.
And wash your ass.
That too.